Well, again, welcome to our presentation titled, What is the Golden Rosycross? The Contemporary Self-Initiation Process. As the title of today's presentation suggests, we will begin by offering a brief overview of the school's origin and what the spiritual school of the Golden Rosycross represents. And afterwards, we will then speak about the path of self-initiation, which is in fact at the heart of our philosophy and what our pupils and members strive for, which is the process for transformation leading to ultimately transfiguration. So through that process, the old nature gradually gives way to the awakening new soul consciousness. And this is absolutely not reserved for a select few. It's possible it's offered to each one of us to be able to do so. Then during the presentation, we'll be using the school's central symbol, the square, circle, triangle, and the point at the center to further explore this journey of inner transformation and self-initiation of the human being. So what is the spiritual school of the Golden Rosycross, one may ask? Many of the historic information is available on many online platforms, but I can summarize it this way. The spiritual school was founded in the Netherlands in 1924. Yes, it's been 100 years, 2 years ago, by Jan van Reckenborg, who was born Jan Lehner, his brother Wim Lehner, and later developed together with Katarose de Petri, who was born Henriette Stockhauser. So the school later spread throughout the world with groups in just about all the continents, certainly in Europe, notably in America, on the Americas, which we were all reminded includes North America, Central America, and South America. Of course, Africa and Oceania, that includes Australia and New Zealand. So we can trace its roots in the 17th century Rosicrucian manifestos and earlier Christian mystical Gnostic and Hermetic traditions. I would also say that the school of the Golden Rosycross, which is also called the Lectorium Rosicrucianum, is a modern Rosicrucian spiritual school and is dedicated to inner transformation through self-awareness, conscious connection, and then self-initiation. And as I mentioned, it's a modern expression of the universal wisdom. And as such, it's focused on inner self Freemasonry rather than outer rituals. So it's a spiritual path designed for the modern human being, for us, basically, living in this Aquarian era, where awareness and inner awakening are becoming central in our lives. So we no longer look outside ourselves for salvation. Instead, we're invited to turn inward and then recognize that the starting point is already within us. So we're basically given the choice to create that connection with the divine within. And that way, to begin our spiritual journey, because each and every one of us, as I mentioned before, has within himself or herself a grain of the divine. And that presence quietly calls to us, sometimes gently, sometimes more strongly, urging us to step onto that onto that road and truly start that journey of a lifetime, or several lifetimes for that matter. So the spiritual school. Yeah, thank you. So when we refer to the spirit, we're not referring to an external entity, but we are referring at an existing anchor, something that's within ourselves. We are connected to a deeper spiritual reality. It's also described as a latent higher reality already present at the core of the human being. So it's kind of like a patient witness that grows stronger and more present as we open ourselves to its call. So the Golden Rosycross sees the spiritual growth not as something given from outside, but as something that unfolds from within us through awareness, reflection, and especially the lived experience. So it essentially lives at the core of our own being. We call it the spirit sparks. Others calls it the mustard seed, the lotus flower, or the inner Christ principle, Atman, and so on. But more importantly, the Golden Rosycross emphasized that this spirit cannot be forced into activity by willpower. Instead, it awakens through inner stillness, self-observation, and when we gradually surrender our egocentric tendencies. And we define ourselves also as a school, and why? Because we consider ourselves perpetual students, or pupil, as we call ourselves. We use the world we live in to gather the experiences thrown at us by our given environment. So the world, you can say that the world is like our classroom, right? We are our own teachers, or more accurately, the spirit in our core is our master, our real master. So it's a path of inner transformation that each one of us at our own pace enters into. So the spirit that has been activated by our self-awareness, conscious connection, leads us to a change in the way we relate to the world and our fellow human being. So you may notice that I use the word relate and not the word react. The world. This is a very important point as we navigate life. Yeah, next. So in alchemy, gold has always been considered as the ultimate metal, right? So the Renaissance alchemists did attempt the transmutation of base metal into gold. So in that sense, gold was considered the most perfect metal, incorruptible, stable, and pure. So when the Golden Rosycross speaks about gold, it's not referring to material wealth, but to the end result of an inner spiritual process. In alchemy, gold represents what is pure, incorruptible, and complete. And in the same way, spiritual gold symbolizes a consciousness that has been purified of egocentrism and inner conflict. It usually points to the awakening of the divine spirit spark within us and to the gradual transformation from a self-centered awareness to a new soul-centered consciousness. So when we refer to gold, you can understand it as if you're referring to the completion of the inner alchemical journey, the rebirth of the human being into harmony with the divine source. And in that way, gold will symbolize the goal of the spiritual path, which is the rebirth of the divine human in harmony with universal consciousness. So also, when we speak about what lies beyond powers, forces, or entities, we mean that the ultimate divine reality is not another energy, another being, or spiritual forces somewhere in the universe. It's not something you can contact or control or experience as an object. It's really the silent source or the presence behind everything, the origin of all life and consciousness. The real spiritual growth is not about gaining special powers or connecting with higher entities, but about letting go of the ego so that the deeper divine essence within us can reconnect with that quiet absolute source. One of our salient symbols is the rose and the cross. The rose at the center of the cross represents the divine spark within the heart, the spirit spark atom that I've been referring to earlier. Is the latent original divine principle within the human being in full bloom. It symbolizes inner awakening, the spiritual rebirth, a transformation of consciousness, the birth of a new soul awareness. So just to put it all together, spiritual awakening is the beginning. It's the moment when a person becomes aware of the deeper spiritual reality within them and feels a call of something more, something higher. And from there, the work becomes building a new consciousness, gradually transforming the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we act, so that effectively aligns with what the inner awakening is. Over time, this inner transformation leads to becoming a new human being, not outwardly different in appearance, of course, but inwardly renewed, living from a higher soul-centered awareness. So if we bring this first part together, what we see is that the Golden Rosycross is not about adopting a set of beliefs, performing rituals, or following an external authority. It's about a process of inner change, what we call self-initiation. So that simply means gradually learning to think, to feel, and act in a new way. It's often described as bringing head, heart, and hands into alignment. And through that process, a person becomes more aware, more responsible, and more inwardly free, which is the goal. Even the name Golden Rosy Cross carries this meaning. Goals, as I mentioned earlier, points to what is essential and enduring within us. The rose symbolizes the awakening of our inner spiritual life. And the cross represents, in a way, our human experience, the challenges, tensions, and responsibilities of everyday life. But when you put it together, the Golden Rosy Cross describes a path where inner transformation doesn't mean stepping away from the world, but engaging with it more consciously and meaningfully. And with that, as our foundation, we can now turn to the explanation on the main symbol of the school itself. Neto, please take over.
Thank you, Mary Rose. Very, very nice and clear and comprehensive explanation you've given us about the essence of the school in this first part. What we would like to do right now is to take one step further and try to go a little bit deeper into these three ideas: the spiritual awakening, building a new consciousness, and becoming a new human being. Because actually, in modern words, these three ideas, they point to the timeless threefold mystery of the initiation process that has been taught by the universal teachings throughout the world in different times to different nations and peoples, but in essence, it's always the same. So here you can see, for example, the threefold mystery of the Christian tradition: John, Jesus, and Christ. You can also see the three roses of the classic mysteries of the Rosycross: the white rose, the red rose, and the golden rose. You can also refer to alchemy with nigredo, albedo, and rubedo, and so on. Okay, but in essence, they all point to our own being. They all point to the different elements that form, that constitute our real essence, with the spirit, the soul or the consciousness, and the human being or the body or matter. In the symbol of the Golden Rosy Cross, you have a very special way to see the interconnection of those different elements, the spirit, the soul or the consciousness, and the entire life of the human being or the body or matter. So let's try to go a little bit deeper into each one of them in this moment. The symbol of the Golden Rosy Cross has four main elements. It has a point in the center. It has, a totally balanced triangle around it. Also, another perfect shape, that is the square, surrounded by the most perfect of the shapes, that is the circle or the sphere. You can see this in 2D, 3D, or even in higher dimensions, right? But what we'll try to do right now is to, unlock this key, because it's really a multidimensional key, this symbol, as a basis to understand the self-initiation process. So everything begins with the point in the center. That's why we highlighted it as a circle in gold, right? And a moment ago, we talked about the three different aspects of the initiation. This is the first one, the spiritual awakening. And it represents the fact that the spirit spark, the real center of the core, the innermost of our being, awakens. Mary Rose explained before that it's not us that through an exercise, concentration, meditation, repeating a mantra or any other aspect, it's not us that will awaken the spirit. Dear friends, it is exactly the other way around. It is the spirit that awakens us. The spirit, as the center of our being, is able to touch the core of our consciousness when we go through the circle of life, when we go through the wheel of experiences, the wheel of karma, of reincarnation, the wheel of samsara, different names in different traditions, but they all point to the fact that as a consciousness, we need to reach a point of maturity, of inner maturity, when we realize that, the egocentric life that we live is deprived of meaning. It doesn't have meaning. It is a life with no center. It is a crazy wheel spinning in the desert without purpose, without meaning. So when we go through the necessary experiences in this life, in 1,000 lives, it varies for each one of us, the length of this path, because in reality, it's a loop in eternity, going through the line of time. We are repeating the experiences to a point where we realize uh, the, 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 the lack of meaning of the egocentric existence. And when that happens, when the center of our soul finally becomes mature after countless experiences, then the spirit spark, like an inner sun, can touch the center of the soul, as if we were walking on a desert, and all of a sudden, after chasing our own shadow on the sands, we could feel the warmth and the heat of the sun that rises on the horizon behind us. And it is exactly like that. We don't see the sun to begin with. We don't see the light. That's why alchemy does not begin with anything else but the nigredo. In other words, to become aware of our own inner ignorance, our own inner darkness. And in the moment that we close the cycle of experiences and the spirit spark becomes active and awakens the very core of our soul, of our consciousness, we start to look for answers. We become seekers of the truth, seekers of our own real being. That is a life-changing experience. And for sure, all of those that in their path, in their lives, look for something else other than self-fulfillment for their egocentric objectives, those individuals have gone through the cycle of experiences, and they have been awakened to a new dimension They mentioned that they still don't know in their lives, but certainly they will find out. It is for all those human beings that have matured and that have closed that cycle of experiences that the spiritual schools of all times, they speak to those individuals. And that's also the objective, that's also the purpose of the Golden Rosycross. And it's not a coincidence that the very, center of our symbol is that point, uh, that indication of that spark in the innermost of our real being. So that is the signature of a seeker. And that is the basis for the construction of the self-initiation process. That's why the self-initiation process cannot begin until the cycle of self-delusion of ego finishes. And that's why it's not possible to train our ego with hidden capacities or a projection in the astral world or a mystic ecstasies or controlling powers or manipulating hidden powers. uh, those aspects, they all belong to the cycle of experiences of the egocentric consciousness, and sooner or later the seeker will find out by herself or by himself that all this, despite being very interesting and apparently very deep and powerful, they all belong to the realm of the egocentric consciousness. So the self-initiation process begins when the illusion, the self-delusion of ego finishes. It's not a coincidence, for example, that in the Christian mysteries, uh, this phase corresponds to John that speaks in the desert and that moves to the very border of his own consciousness, the limit of his state of consciousness in the Jordan, until the point that he sees his twin coming from the other side. His twin is the awakened spirit spark, the divine spark that became active in him or in her. So, based upon that impulse that does not bring us peace, but it is a very disquieting force because it shakes us up to the very foundation of our egocentric life. That is the basis that we can use to build something new. And what is this something new that we need to build? It is a new consciousness. It is a new soul. It is a new set of forces that are pure, balanced, connected, and that function with a center, not as a chaotic wheel turning in the desert, but as the needle of a compass, as the triangle of the Freemasons, the trowel of the Freemasons, the tool that is used to build a new reality. The consciousness is this tool, but it needs to be a new tool, a new consciousness. So that's the work of a lifetime. That's why, as Mary Rose explained in the beginning, we don't have masters in the school. Of course, we have the founders of the school, but we are all those that belong to the school. We call ourselves from the very first day on this path until the very last one. We call ourselves pupils because we are always learning. We are always going through this same process of demolishing the old egocentric consciousness in us and building a totally new consciousness, a new state of consciousness based on the very center, on the spirit spark in our innermost. So that triangle is a perfectly balanced triangle, and it has three vertices. It has three main parts: the heart, the head, and our hands, or the heart sanctuary, the head sanctuary, and the pelvic sanctuary, or the life sanctuary. In other words, those are the three instances of our consciousness. You can see that as the subconscious, the conscious, and the unconscious. You can see that as feeling, thinking, and acting. It doesn't matter the way you describe it. Just look to yourself, in yourself, and don't treat this as an external concept. But it's a life-changing experience, in the sense that we need to engage all the aspects of our consciousness in this process. Nothing can be left behind. That's why, once again, in alchemy, we begin with the difficulties. We begin with nigredo. In other words, the inventory of materials that through the different cycles of our lives was not yet transmuted. And that inventory, that warehouse of elements, is located in the three different centers of our consciousness. So the very beginning is the activity of the spirit spark in the heart that creates this shock in ourselves, that really disorients the compass of the egocentric consciousness, and makes its needle point everywhere and nowhere, because before it was oriented by the lines of force of our delusions, our desires, our habits. But after the activity of the spirit spark, after it becomes active, then it is as if we went through a magnetic storm, and the lines of force of our egocentric consciousness, they are subverted. They are not demolished, but there's a severe interference in them. And that allows the heart to enter in resonance with the spirit spark. And through this resonance, this impulse can reach our head through, sparks of self-awareness, of self-knowledge, where we can actually see ourselves as we are and not as we would like to be. So that's the beginning of the end of illusion, in the moment that we start realizing who we actually are, and we start putting aside all the illusions of grandeur and of self-beliefs about ourselves. So the shock in the heart that creates this lightning in the head, this moment of awareness, that if we pay attention to it and we accept it, to look at ourselves as we truly are, free of illusions, we start to build a new capacity, a new organic capacity, that is self-knowledge. So the activity of the spirit spark in the heart, self-knowledge, allows us to start freeing ourselves from the old astral torrents or currents of emotions and feelings. Not that we will stop having emotions or feelings, it's just the other way around, but we'll become aware of them, and we'll be able to utilize them in a positive, constructive way, and not to continue to be totally dominated by them in an unconscious way. That's why we call the second step after self-knowledge, we call it a conscious connection, as it was mentioned before. So the heart and the head are not only transformed by the spirit spark, but they are reunited. We have traced two sides of the triangle, and the last one can become manifested through action. It's indicated with the word hands. It means our pelvic sanctuary, our life sanctuary, but also the center of our actions, our reactions, our unconscious habits, etc. That's really the bigger part of the iceberg under the water. And that's the hardest part to be changed. Many people in life, they try to become somebody else by forcing themselves to do something or to not to do something. But this is just trying to change the course of this iceberg without truly understanding the underlying currents that drive it in the ocean. So what needs to happen is an inner change, not an external forced transformation, but a true inner genuine change. And that can happen after self-knowledge and this conscious connection become so strong and so united that they allow this lightning of the spirit to really go deep and to start illuminating the depths of the water, the depths of our unconscious. So we can, first of all, understand who we are, accept who we are, and without trying to force reality in a forced way, allow the divine will, the omnipresent will of the all that lives in us, to point the right direction, the direction of the correct action or the right action that truly transforms and transmutes the karma into dharma. And this process, dear friends, doesn't happen at once. There's no magic pill that we can take and everything is going to work differently from one day to the other. This is a life process. We need to engage our entire being in this transformation. And that's what it takes. It takes everything. That's why one of the founders of the school used to repeat a philosopher saying, it's all or nothing, right? The words of Spinoza. Because when we engage all we have, the all, the one, can manifest itself in us. And heart, head, and hands can be united, and a new consciousness can be born. The Rosicrucians also call this a new soul. And that new soul has, its presence in time, but it was actually born out of a timeless principle. It was born out of eternity itself, out of the spirit. And that is a very powerful reality, because when a consciousness is united and balanced and it functions in harmony around the real center of life, it can start to change reality itself. And that's the third phase of the process, that is becoming a new human being. And if we mentioned before that it is a process of a lifetime to manifest a new consciousness, to actually transform the very foundation of our reality. Yes, it does engage our entire life. And again, that's why we are pupils from the first to the last day. And it is a square because it needs to touch reality. It needs to touch matter. It needs to take shape in our true existence. that's the manifestation of a new personality, of new aspects of the construction of life. In the school, we explain that our body is a fourfold body. We have the physical body, but we also have the energetic body that gives life to it, that we call the etheric body. Our feelings and individuality take shape in our astral body, and our consciousness uses as a mirror our mental body. We can also see the four elements, the four classic elements of nature: uh, fire, earth, air, and water. Those are the four alchemical elements as well. Um, so, regardless of how you look at that, you can even see the square as the basis of a new pyramid that also unites the triangle, the point in the center, in the circle of the desert. So there are countless ways of looking at that and understanding it, but this only makes sense when we bring this reality to us, to the way we live, to the way we think, to the way we desire, to the way that we feel, and to the way that we act. That's why it needs to become a new construction, a new reality, a new life. And when a human being is able to unite in this way the spirit, the soul, and the body, or the universal principle in herself or himself, their entire consciousness and their entire life, then we can become what we need to be in this moment. We talk so much that is absolutely necessary and fundamental to change the world. But how can we change the world if we do not change ourselves in the first place? And every attempt to bring a new reality to humanity is absolutely valid and necessary. We all know that. But dear friends, what the spiritual school of the Golden Rosycross and what the spiritual schools of all times try to teach us in a very loving way is that we must accept first the inner battle. Then, if we are able to overcome ourselves, if we are able to overcome our ego, we can be a change agent for the world, not necessarily through our words or by engaging in this or that initiative. They are all valid, but we can do that through a fundamental transformation of ourselves. We have trillions of cells. We have billions of human beings that form humanity. If we want to heal an organ, a tissue, or an aspect of our body, the change needs to take place at the cellular level. We need to regenerate and transform the cells. That's the challenge that we have today. And in chemistry, we know the concept of the catalysts. You don't need huge quantities of a catalyst to change the state or the reality of an entire quantum of matter. So if a certain number of human beings were able to awaken spiritually after a long cycle of egocentric experiences, become a seeker based on that, a seeker of the truth, a seeker of themselves, to engage in a process to change their consciousness based upon that principle, and then to take the challenge of transforming their own life based on this, they would become, as Gandhi suggested, they would become the change that they wanted to see in the world. So, in essence, that's the invitation. That's the possibility that a spiritual school gives us. And that's the possibility that the spiritual school of the Golden Rosycross offers to the contemporary human being in this very moment.